Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the editor-in-chief at National Jeweler. Pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series. Today's session features all four National Jeweler editors, myself, Brecken, Ashley, and Lenore, in conversation about the highs and lows of 2021. Before we start the discussion, I just wanted to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can drop it into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of their screens. I'll be back on after the discussion to share any questions with our panelists. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday, December 17th. Now, let's get started with our questions. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. It's so nice to see you all in little boxes on a screen again. So today's topic is looking ahead or looking back on 2021. And so we're going to be talking about the trends, the news events, and kind of the headlines that shape the year and kind of what our takeaways from 2021 in general, which was overall, as everyone knows, a really good year for the jewelry industry. So Brecken, I'm going to start with you. And the first question is, what was your favorite story that you wrote this year?
Sure. Hi, everybody. First, I guess to give a really quick introduction, I am National Jeweler's senior editor of Colored Gemstones. So I think it's fitting that I picked, probably unsurprisingly to you guys, one of my 5 things stories. It's always my favorite to write. So I picked 5 things to know about rhodochrosite. That one in particular because it combined so many of my favorite parts about writing for the colored stone market, which is, of course, talking about supply, sourcing. You know, there's a new mine that's opening that's now producing rhodochrosite, as well as digging into what's so special about it and the mineral collecting part of it, which is one of my new favorite things to dig into. And also because it was one of the first things, maybe the first thing that went into this kind of depth that I had written after I had finished a class at GIA about colored stone. So that made sort of the research part of it particularly fun, you know, to sort of understand things in a different perspective. So that was definitely my favorite, though I do have to say that I think a runner-up for a different reason was the story that I did on tracing the lab-grown diamond pricing. And I would say that because that was a completely different thing for me. So anybody who knows, we obviously launched our Diamonds quarterly newsletter dedicated, and we had one devoted to lab-grown diamonds. And that was just a lot of fun to sort of dive into something new and see how it goes and, you know, be able to talk to experts in the diamond market that I don't usually get to hear from. So that was a close second for me.
Okay. All right, Ashley, your favorite story that you wrote this year?
Yeah, so I am the senior editor fashion, and it's funny because I think I have had a little bit of trouble finding my footing in the world of covering celebrity jewelry. It's just, I remember when I first started at National Jeweler just feeling very uncomfortable with covering the awards shows. It just took me a while to really get into my groove and kind of understand the flow of this type of news and understanding, you know, what can I add to a story when like when a celebrity is engaged, for example, and you have People magazine and TMZ and Us Weekly and just like every single big kind of celebrity outlet talking about it. Like, how do I kind of change that for our readers, like have something to really add value for our readers that's jewelry focused? And that's something that Michelle has really guided me in since being at National Jeweler. So I actually think that my favorite story that I wrote this year was when Ben Affleck gifted Jennifer Lopez a found ring necklace, because it became a headline. So I saw the headline and I just was so proud of the story because I found my own little angle, and it was actually my own little celebrity angle. But the only reason I even knew about this was because I'm very jewelry obsessed. So I remembered clearly that Ben Affleck's ex-girlfriend Ana de Armas, the actress who also is in the NDC campaigns just promoting diamond jewelry, I knew that she was a big Foundry fan. And she had pictures on her Instagram, like wearing these fabulous Foundry necklaces. And I was just like, everyone thinks the story here is that Ben Affleck and J-Lo are back together and there's jewelry and whatever. But the real story is that I think this was a dig at the ex because Foundry is Ana de Armas's thing. And then Ben Affleck gifts Jennifer Lopez. I mean, I just loved delving into the drama of that. So it was a very proud moment for me because I was just remembering how out of my depths I felt getting into celebrity jewelry coverage, just not really knowing how to add to the conversation. And now I have a lot of fun with writing these celebrity engagement stories and kind of making them entertaining. So that was a personal good moment for me this year.
Yeah, that was really a lot of fun. And I loved your take on it. That was really an astute observation to remember that Ana de Armas had been wearing Foundry too. I enjoyed that. Lenore, what about you? What was the favorite story that you wrote here in 2021?
So I'm Lenore Fedow. I'm the associate editor of news at National Jeweler. And I have two favorites for you. So my first favorite story of the year was the Halloween story that I did. I wrote about the world's most cursed jewels. And I wrote a few similar stories kind of in that vein. And it's just always such a fun rabbit hole to fall into. Just researching all these myths and legends, their origins, what do people think they mean? Those are always super fun for me to write. And then my second favorite was I had written an opinion piece about Victoria's Secret's rebranding plan. And I sort of outlined, what their plan was, where I thought they sort of missed the mark, and what I thought that jewelers could learn from the mistakes I felt that they were making. I follow that company pretty closely. I sort of hate follow them, to be honest. And I just think when I look at retail overall, I think they're a really interesting case study because I think it's interesting to see how brands who were maybe somewhat problematic in the past are going to have to evolve if they want to cater to modern day consumers. So those are my two favorites.
Okay. Those are also two very, very good ones. So my favorite personally is one I wrote. I think I wrote this maybe in the fall. It was called Netflix Halston is a Hit. Now let's have a biopic on Elsa Peretti. And I thought that was really, really fun. I watched Halston on Netflix. People haven't seen it, well worth watching. And I believe Ewan McGregor won the Emmy for it, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just about his rise to fame as a fashion designer, how he got his start, and how Elsa Peretti kind of played into that. And it was really, I loved watching the series and kind of spotting all the jewelry they had, even though it wasn't the correct timing. They had, people, they had Liza Minnelli, for example, who was one of Halston's good friends, and they had her in a bone cuff way before Elsa started designing the bone cuff. But it was fun to watch all the little jewelry Easter eggs appearing all over the series. And then to write about it, kind of make a point I think Elsa deserves her own show because she played a big role in Halston's success. And then she really, she did so much with Tiffany, and really also not just her jewelry designs, but the way she negotiated her contract as a woman designer in that time. There were not that many of them. And I just think she'd be an interesting person I'd totally watch another, 6, 7, 8, 9 series, limited series about Elsa Peretti. And if anyone needs any help writing it, I totally help with that too. Put that out there. All right, now we're going to go in reverse order. Lenore, you'll be up, and I want to know, what is a story that one of the other editors wrote this year that you particularly liked?
So my favorite story by another editor this year was actually Brecken's State of the Major story that looked at how large mining companies were impacting local mining communities. And I just thought, not to butter you up here, Brecken, but I just
please go ahead.
I just thought it was so well done and it was so well reported. And it was just really a testament to how talented Brecken is and how well she notes her beat. I thought that was a really great one. And then I thought Michelle also wrote two really touching tributes for both Alex Wu and Estelle Hedaya. I thought it was a really lovely way to remember them both. I thought those were great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, really, really sad. Two of the many sad losses we had this year. Ashley, your favorite stories that someone else wrote?
Yeah, so these are actually stories that have already been mentioned. So clearly we were doing something right with these. But Lenore's Victoria's Secret story, I thought was great. It's really fun when we can take a cultural moment or something large happening in retail or in culture, like even similar to you writing about Halston, Michelle, and then kind of give our 2 cents, our input into that subject matter, whether it's speaking to jewelry, to retail in general. But when we can meld that, it's really nice because day to day we're very like super focused in our niche. And it's nice to have those moments where we take a step back, kind of apply things to broader culture. Whether it's like more fluffy or more serious, I think that those are always great reads. And I know that here at National Jeweler, we really enjoy when something is irking Lenore and she writes about it. We just feel she's very strong at that.
Thank you.
And it's like very fun because I just thought it was so spot on with companies when they're making, let's say, cosmetic changes versus like real changes at the top. Like it's very worth talking about. And then also I do have to say, I thought that Michelle's Alex Wu story was another personal favorite. I mean, just because of the gravitas and, it's just like such a big loss this year. And of course, those are not the stories that we want to write or that we want to read, but it's, they're very meaningful stories that you're still thinking about at the end of the year.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ashley. I mean, I'd known this is in the story, but I'd known Alex probably since 2008. I mean, I feel like Alex is one of the first people that I met in the industry. And I was, she's about my age. I was just shocked when she died. Nobody knew she was sick. And it's just so unbelievably sad. But I was, it's, you don't want to write those stories, but when you have to write them, you want to do it right. Like you want to give people a tribute that's like, honors their life. So thank you. Brecken, favorite story that someone else wrote?
Sure. So I also had almost all, ideas that have already been said, including Halston for you, Michelle. I just thought you clearly like had so much fun watching that and writing about it. And I think you're 100% on point. I think we can probably look forward to Elsa Peretti's docs coming soon.
And again, writers available here.
Yeah, one more plug. I also said for Ashley, the Ben Affleck, Ana de Armas, thing, because the line in there about, this is the equivalent of introducing your ex to a restaurant and then you see your ex there with the new one. And it's like, I just thought that was gold. I loved it. And then Lenore, for you, I also obviously had Cursed Jewels. I thought that one was so much fun. So I'm going to talk about one we haven't picked, which is Lenore's blog. We need to change the way we talk about lab grown diamonds. Going back to Ashley's point about, we love when Lenore sort of gets on this, you're very good at, I think, honing your sort of irritation or like your thoughts about something into like a very productive conversation, which I think it was. I love when you guys all write blogs because I think you're very good at pulling your thoughts into something that makes sense. And, to your point, Ashley, is a productive conversation. So I really like that because I think you spoke really well to what we all feel about this conversation for lab grown diamonds and, sort of both sides taking shots at each other when it's really about other things. So that's the one I'm going to call out for now.
Well, thank you. That was a fun one to write.
Again, there's something that pissed Lenore off, which is bold for us in the office.
Yeah, now we know the recipe.
Lenore, later we're going to talk about what you're going to hate on in 2022, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so it's time for my 5, and I pick one from each of you because I cannot just pick one. So Ashley, I'm going to pick one that nobody has mentioned yet, and this is just because this category is such a personal favorite to me. You did a story, Ashley Zhang is making mourning jewelry for the modern woman. I thought that was such a gorgeous collection. It was so beautifully covered. I didn't see anyone else writing about it. And it's absolutely, and that story was so popular on our site too. And I just thought I just loved her take on mourning. I love mourning jewelry and antique jewelry in general. And I loved her take on it. I was so happy we did that story. I love when we have stories I don't see anywhere else, which gets hard when you're doing something you have to produce content every day. It's hard for every single publication to produce completely original content every day that hasn't been reported somewhere else. But I love that one. For Lenore, I'm also going to have to go, that was just mentioned, but we need to change the way we talk about lab grown diamonds. I just wrote a story about going to see the Lightbox factory, which is De Beers factory outside of Portland. And I was forbidden in it from talking about the debate of lab grown diamonds because of Lenore, which I did not mind. I just thought that was a great piece. And I don't know why I didn't write it, because it's something I've thought for a long time. I'm just so tired of all the just endless back and forth about the same thing over and over and over again, and really has nothing to do with what consumers going to decide about lab grown diamonds in the long run. And Brecken, for you, I'm going to go with 5 things to know about coral. Because I've been in the industry for 13, 14 years now. I learned more about coral in that one article than I've learned in the entire time I've been in the industry. There were so many things I didn't know about coral. I didn't know, for instance, that the kind of coral they use for jewelry is not what we think of when we think of the coral reef, like the Great Barrier Reef. It's actually much, much deeper in the ocean. Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And I just thought it's just so interesting. I never really knew anything about coral, and I thought you just did such a great job with that story. So what about, now we're going to change gears a little bit. We talk about our favors. Does anybody have a story you worked hard on that you expected to get more feedback on and didn't? Or maybe you were disappointed with the amount of feedback you did get? And Brecken, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. I think I probably have to jump to a pretty recent story, which is the protests that were happening in Merengue. I think when you write a story like that, you kind of assume that there's going to be a lot of chatter about it, that locals in an area where diamonds are mined are taking issue with what's happening there, especially given that the KP meeting was happening right at the same time. So I, spent a decent amount of time trying to really understand what was going on there and reaching out to people on the ground to get a better idea of it. And there was surprisingly little, at least to me directly or from what I saw on social media, conversation around it. So that kind of disappointed me. But you put those things out, you're never quite sure what's going to happen. So
it's like the Kimberly process. Every year I do a long
Michelle's
story.
like, yeah,
what happened at the Kimberly process meeting, and every year nobody reads it.
Yeah.
Ashley, any stories that you did that you thought you were going to get more feedback on and you didn't?
Sorry. That is a great point about Brecken's story. It is kind of a recurring theme that these like human rights stories we think are going to blow up and it's always such a huge topic too among consumers, among people, and then like these stories like don't get as much traction. That was a great story. We will make sure to find the link to that one because that was a really good story. For me, we recently had to kill a story of mine, so it never ran, but it was the first thing that came to mind. And it was one of those things where, again, with the celebrity coverage, we were going to talk about Kylie Jenner coming out with her 2-stone ring. She and Stormi posted their 2-stone diamond rings on Instagram. And, just to put our own spin on it, like I was talking about before, we were speaking to different designers who have kind of championed the 2-stone styles, like particularly the ladies of Gemma Wynn, who really kind of like made that a huge part of their brand and who have been like super knocked off. Like even in Kylie and Stormi's rings, it was like very similar to Gemma Wynn. And just talking to designers about like, what do they feel about it? Is it trending? And, kind of doing a little bit of a deeper dive. So we were going to publish it the week after Kylie posted it. And that was the Monday after Astroworld. And so we like went back and forth. Well, can we take out this and that? And like, we just had to kill it the morning it was supposed to run, which is problematic for us just with the stories, because we're putting out new stories each day. So we want to have them, but it was just like, that's just super unfortunate timing that you can't plan for, just like W Magazine running around trying to pull their issues of Kylie and Travis on the cover of W that they had to pull. So it was sad.
Oh, I didn't even know about that.
I didn't either.
They had to, and some still went out in print, and they were just like racing to try to like get them. It was like that close. But it's just that there were so many pretty rings in the story, and so it was just a bummer to like collect all of that and have it ready, and you just can't plan for those things.
No, I mean, there was absolutely no way. And the funny thing is, I don't know that we've ever written a story about her specifically before, ever, that I can recall. She's never been engaged, right?
Because she's never been engaged.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, she doesn't really appear on red carpets so much, I don't think. I mean, I don't remember ever writing a story about her. And it was just unfortunate timing. And like, to have to kill a story, and I feel bad for the writer because it was a great story, Ashley, and you spent time on it, but there was just no way. And then we like, what if we take her out entirely? And you're like, well, it just won't work. Like, the whole story's about her. Like, otherwise it just doesn't work. And like, it just, it was just the worst timing ever. Like, there was nothing you could be done about it. But killing a story is not something we do often. It's not something we take lightly. Lenore, any stories, any disappointments from you?
So the first one that comes to mind was I wrote about a dispute between a jeweler in the Diamond District and the rapper Lil Baby, who had been unknowingly sold a fake Patek Philippe watch. And it was actually one of these like Instagram, like fake spotter accounts that alerted him to it. And so I interviewed the jeweler who sold it to him and, sort of let him clear the air on what happened there. And I thought, given that it was a celebrity story, it would do pretty well, but it kind of just did, so-so, which was a little disappointing, but.
I mean, and it's a topic jewelers I would think it would have interest in, like how to avoid selling fakes. Like, how did this happen?
Right. Which is how I framed it, as much as it was a celebrity story, sort of something jewelers could learn from it as well. But it was a little bit of a flop.
Sorry, that happens. Like West Side Story right now. Mine is just my annual Kimberly process story. I like spent a lot of time, like I read the whole minutes from the Kimberly process. We talk about what went on, crickets. But I mean, that's just kind of I could just get on here every year and say the Kimberly process and not be wrong. Which isn't to say I'm going to stop covering it or I don't think it's important. It's just kind of my annual something that I feel like we should cover. And I'm going to continue to cover, but it just doesn't seem to resonate with the audience as much. So our next category is surprise stories, which is the opposite. So something you didn't think would do well, something you kind of just put together last minute, like, oh, we need this. And people ended up loving. And I'm going to go first because I have a funny story with mine. So mine is the auction of Sammy Davis Jr.'s jewelry at Bonhams over the summer. So actually, I have a funny story about you on this one. If you remember, I originally sent it, I think, to Brecken for a preview before the auction happened. I was like, Sammy Davis Jr.'s jewelry up at auction, like, let's cover it. And Ashley, you said something just funny. It was like, it's kind of a little stretch for jewelry. And I didn't disagree, but it was summer. It was slow news time. And I was like, just write about it. It blew up. And then the actual sale of his jewelry is one of our, I think, if I'm not mistaken, top 10 or at least top 20 most read stories of the year. So there must be like a horde of people who are out there Googling like Sammy Davis Jr. jewelry, because he actually was known for being like a very dapper dresser, and his jewels were very much of his time, like 60s, 70s, big, chunky gold. They were flashy. And he was a performer. He was not only a comedian, singer, he was an actor. And his jewels were very outspoken, like he was. And so there must be people out there who are Googling that. And it must be one of those things where we were one of the few people to cover it because our story got so many hits. And I just thought that was funny because it was one of those things I signed, slow news time during the summer. A little niche market of people might be interested in this. Let's just do it. And then boom. Anyway, Brecken, do you want to go ahead? Unless
that was gonna be the one I was gonna mention too, because I remember it was, sort of like, not to call it filler, but it was like here's a story of an auction. And auctions you can sometimes predict, like obviously if there's a huge stone, it's gonna catch eyes, but like the smaller
or if it's
stuff,
somebody like uber famous,
right, a celebrity. There's like a brand
Marie
name you can
Antoinette's
tell.
bracelets.
But that one was just so funny, and there was a lot of back and forth. And I think even the preview story tended to lean a little bit farther into, forgive me, the designer's name, Art Smith. And then, there was also mention of, Sammy Davis Jr. And then when we ran the results story, we were watching the analytics. And I remember, Michelle, you and I being like, where is this? What is this caught in? Is there a Sammy Davis Jr. fan page that's posted this? And like, it just kept climbing and climbing. And it's like, it was really surprising, the numbers on that one. But I think it's sort of fitting because it's a sort of interesting time in auctions. Like, I feel like the pandemic has done a lot to like the amount of sales that are happening, and like all this celebrity stuff and historic stuff that's coming to auction has really risen a lot. So I feel like it's fitting. I don't know.
Well, we just had someone say in the comments that the stories and events about celebrities from a bygone era are super popular. It's escapism in a time when things seem simpler and glamorous. And I think that's absolutely, thank you, Tammy, in the comments. It's absolutely true. I mean, especially right now, I think that people are looking for nostalgia and escapism. And I'm sure for a lot of people, Sammy Davis Jr., I mean, he wasn't as popular in our time, but like for my parents, people like that, I mean, he was huge. He was part of the Rat Pack,
Yeah.
Ashley, any surprises for you this year?
It's, I guess on one hand, it shouldn't be that surprising, but like certain words, the way that they'll just spark so much readership is kind of amazing to me. So like example, a man who is a descendant of the Cartiers, he's been like a Beverly Hills jewelers for like a long time at this point, but now he's doing like lab grown diamond engagement rings too, and like
Click.
Yeah, and just the fact of having the in the headline Cartier lab grown diamond, and then it just gets so big when like in no way was I trying to like pull the wool over anyone's eyes and say like Cartier is now has lab grown diamond jewelry or anything like that, but just those buzzwords are just super of interest to the industry always.
Yeah, that was SEO gold, Ashley.
Yeah, that definitely was SEO gold. I mean, yeah, you definitely weren't trying to pull the wool over the eyes, but I think it is worth mentioning it's somebody whose personal history is so steeped in jewelry, and who has designed high-end diamond jewelry, is now like saying, I'm okay with lab grown. Like, that's a big statement.
And it's just that he wasn't a well-known name that, maybe if you lived in his area, you would know him, but I didn't put his name in the headline because he wasn't so recognizable. But so Cartier descendant certainly did it.
Lenore, what was your surprise of the year?
So my surprise story for the year, I wrote a financial analysis piece on Signet Jeweler. And that's very much in my wheelhouse. Like I cover a lot of, financials and publicly traded companies, but, I never take it personally when those stories don't do as well as, a more fun story. So I wasn't expecting a ton of people to be that interested. So I was really happy to see it do so well because it's one of those ones that I work really hard on and I want a lot of readership. And to actually get it was very, very nice.
No, yeah, that was a really good story. Yeah, it is. There are nice surprises sometimes. Sometimes they're just surprises, and they're like really nice surprises. Another one that I wanted to mention that I wrote, I forgot about, was my story on the Pandora Papers, which I thought initially when I was writing it might be a little far afield for the industry. The Pandora Papers, for those who might not know, was a consortium of investigative journalists from around the globe, dropped them over the summer, I believe. And it's looking into the trillions and trillions of dollars held in offshore banks. And it's complicated. And I'm not going to explain it all here, but basically there's nothing wrong with doing that, but it often can lead to money laundering and other issues. And the Pandora Papers also kind of made these points that some of the people hiding this money are some of the leaders of the poorest countries in the world. And here they are with, $500 million stashed in an offshore bank, while the people in their country don't have basic necessities. So I thought it might be a little far afield for jewelry. There were a couple kind of jewelry and jewelry adjacent people mentioned in the papers, So I just was like, so I spent a day. It was really interesting to read into the papers and kind of skim through and figure out who from jewelry was involved. And the story did really, really well. And that's another kind of pleasant surprise because I did spend an entire day kind of going, like coming to understand what the Pandora papers are and why they're important. And then going through and kind of picking out the people from the industry who were mentioned. And I'm sure, I mean, there's more that's coming out from this project. It wasn't just one article. It's articles from journalists from newspapers and websites and magazines all over the world. And I'm sure if I went back and looked at it, I could probably see more people. But yeah, that was really, I'm glad I did it. So two more things we're going to talk about. First is last year when we did this, I know we had a little bit of discussion about our take on trade shows for 2021. What do we think is going to happen? When it's going to happen? Are we going to go? And we actually did go to trade shows this year. So Brecken went to the new Hard Rock Summit in Denver. Ashley and I were the two editors from National Jeweler who attended the Vegas shows. And then Lenore went to Conclave in Dallas. So I wanted each of us to talk a little bit about our experiences there, what kind of the atmosphere was like, and what we thought about in personally being back in person with a trade show. And Lenore, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So I went to Conclave in Dallas this September. I thought it was really well attended. I was very excited to be back. It was one of my first big trade shows since the pandemic started. I think it's also one of like the best conferences for education. I think they always have really interesting speakers, really interesting sessions. And then I also went to JA New York in October, and I thought that they had a pretty good turnout too. In both shows, I would have to say, I really felt for the people who were organizing them. I think that they really went above and beyond to make it as safe as possible for people because people were really excited to go back to trade shows. And I still felt like they had to hound people to follow really basic like health and safety guidelines. So I was a little disappointed, like in my fellow attendees, not following these rules when I felt like so much had been done on the organizers' part, to make these shows happen like everyone wanted them to. So as happy as I was to be back and, around people and seeing jewelry again and, all of that, there was a part of me that was like, oh, this is super frustrating. Like, why can't people just why can't you people just follow the rules? So I had mixed feelings about going back to trade shows this year.
Was it like wearing masks when you say following the rules or like?
Yeah, especially with, Conclave where it's all, for the most part, it's all indoors. It's all in these,
It's just in a hotel.
Yeah. And I don't know what the rules at the time were in Dallas, but I know that the
rules in Dallas are none.
But I know that the organizers were strongly encouraging you to wear masks when you were inside. They had this really interesting like rubber armband system that they did. And it's sort of like a traffic light where you could wear red, yellow, or green. And it signified, what your comfort level was with people. Like, did you want someone to come and hug you? Were you fine with the handshake? Or were you just like, don't come near me? And I took a yellow one, sort of like in between. But about a day in, I wound up taking it off because I'm like, I am the only fool here wearing this armband. I have not seen another one my whole time. So I think AGS did a really good job of making it as safe as possible, but they also can't follow every attendee around all day and make sure that they're following the rules. That should be on you.
And then you run into this kind of issue of like, these people are paying money to be there. So like, how much are you going to harass them about these conferences, aren't cheap to travel there and aren't cheap to attend. And how much are you going to follow around people and harass them? And then you're right. Like there's no winner in that. There's no end game there. Lenore, that's really interesting. I didn't know about those armbands. I'm surprised you didn't take a red one.
Tammy said she was wearing one too. So there was at least two of us.
Okay.
There were two people at Conclave wearing an armband.
Tammy, let us know what color in the comments. Brecken, tell us about the Hard Rock Summit because it was new this year, right? In Denver.
It was new, yeah. So the Hard Rock Summit, I had so much fun when I was there. I was like so ready to be back around my gem people. So for anybody who didn't go, there were two aspects. We had the evolution part, which was minerals, fossils, meteorites, things like that, which was really awesome. A lot of educational content things that they had, which I thought was really engaging. Like there was this room of fluorescent mineral specimens, and it like took me back to when I was a kid and used to go to the local science center with my family, and they had all these, rooms of fluorescent things. It was awesome. I loved it. And then we had Sparkle and Joy, which was the fine gems and jewelry section, which of course had AGTA's new show. So I would say that like it was obviously it's the first year. I think everyone understood that it was very much like a growing year. I mean, it was the first time it was a show. And not only that, but there was still a lot of travel restrictions going on internationally. Certainly, I think nobody was going to make that trip. So it seemed kind of quiet. I wouldn't say it didn't seem like there was a ton of buying activity going on. Every once in a while, there would be a dealer that I would talk to who would say, oh, the first day was great. I sold to a few people, and then it just sort of went quiet. That being said, despite the fact that there didn't seem to be a ton of buying activity, I think that definitely like the enthusiasm is there for it as an event. People seem to be really invested in, taking the time to build it and, coming back. I mean, first of all, who doesn't want to go to Denver in September? Like, I feel like it has a good positioning for Tucson and Denver to be like two of the really big domestic gem shows for us. I mean, there were already events happening in Denver at that time, but they were a little bit, from what I could tell, they were a little bit more geared to the mineral people, rough stones, cutters, that kind of thing. So I think it has a lot of room to go. I think it, people seemed really optimistic about it. And just, I think it sort of, for me, reiterated the fact that despite the fact that we've talked a lot about the pandemic sort of forcing new ways of doing business and reevaluating your trade, that stuff is never going to go away. Like it was seeing people reunited again after so long, and like the joy that they had there for it was very apparent. So I think it has a great future, and it was a good event to be at. I'm really happy that I was there.
Especially after no Tucson.
Especially after no Tucson, right? It was like I was just happy to be there, like talking to people again and looking at stones. I forgot, those kinds of events are only half about doing business as much as making connections. Like, for me, it's really important to be looking at the material and seeing what new is popping up, because those are the kind of conversations that only happen there when somebody's like, oh, this is this new pocket of stuff. And that's where it all comes from. So it was nice. It was great.
Well, that's awesome. And Ashley, you and I were in Vegas together, but I'll let you start. You did Couture and JCK, but mostly Couture?
Mostly Couture. It was actually about 50-50 this year, because it's amazing that I already can't remember, but I don't think they overlapped for even one day. So
No, you're right.
50-50.
They didn't, because Couture was short. It started it was 24, 25, 26. I only remember this because my birthday is August 25th.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then I think that, so it was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I think full JCK started on Friday. There was a little overlap between the early days of JCK Luxury and Couture, but you're right. Full JCK didn't open until Friday.
Yeah. For me, my impression of Vegas was that it felt very similar to years past, just maybe half the size. So that was about it. And then tons of masks, particularly at JCK, which was nice because JCK is truly, truly a crowd. I mean, when you're walking around, you're like, I'm in a big convention hall with, it feels like thousands of people. So that was, so it really seemed like lots of masks. I actually didn't even notice people saying wear your mask. Like people just were kind of doing it. And then at Couture, maybe a little less, or and definitely socializing, whether JCK or Couture, it was kind of like people weren't wearing masks. And I don't know, it's very hard I think you reach a tipping point if you're in a situation where you're not a high risk person for this, with something that's so lingering, I think there's a tipping point for how long you're willing to sit out of everything. So that's just my perspective. My perspective has changed a lot from the very first days of the pandemic. I was like a diehard, everyone stay home and this is going to be over. And now I live in Florida, and there is a difference. There's just really a willingness for people to go on with their lives. And we live in a capitalistic society. So I think it's hard to expect this society to like shut down their businesses for the long term. So, I mean, I think it really just depends on everyone's comfort level. And I think the difficult part is just knowing that different people have different situations at home, depending on their health and the health of the people that they're around a lot. So I really feel for people because I think it negatively impacts people who have a lot of responsibilities with certain family members to avoid others. And I guess, you know, this hybrid model seems to be working because people were really happy to be at the trade shows, it felt like to me.
So I want to piggyback on the hybrid model. So like I said, I too went to Las Vegas. I did Couture and JCK, and I even popped into the antique show for a bit. So for those who might not know, Couture was different this year. The Wynn has a new event space. So Couture moved out of its traditional ballrooms and into this amazing, beautiful new event space. And then the antique show moved into those ballrooms where Couture used to be. So I like this. I like being able to, you know, walk down the hall, go past the antique show, pop in if I wanted. I popped in a couple of times. I'm mainly just like an antique show shopper, to be honest, because I love it. And then move on and kind of do my appointments at Couture. I don't know if that's how they're keeping it in 2022, but I liked the kind of different layout. And I will say, Ashley mentioned that the shows were smaller. I like the smaller shows. And I feel like it was less stress. It was easier to navigate. Like, yes, it was still crowded, but I didn't feel like it was like, it's so overwhelming to me when like JCK is the size it is. And then you have antique, then you have Couture, then AGTA has a thing. And it just gets to be, it's too much. And I felt like, I like that it was like less crowded. I like that it was more spaced out, and I like that it wasn't as big. I know that's not the trade show's game and they're not interested in smaller shows, but for me, I liked it. And I was kind of also like, I was one of the people, I was cautious and wore my mask, but I was vaccinated by that point. So I felt pretty good about going. If I had not been vaccinated, honestly, I probably wouldn't have gone. I just don't feel like it would have been worth it.
I don't think I would have either. I think we talked about that before. It just, vaccination was like a huge part of this.
Yeah. And, you know, now I'm boosted and I'm feeling like really good about heading into the holiday season and trying to see family. So, you know, getting vaccinated was a huge point of comfort for me, but I was also like, it was nice to dip your toe back in, but I also kind of like that the smaller shows let you kind of like come back in gradually. It wasn't getting thrown back into the fire, so to speak, getting thrown back into this massive show that's as crowded as ever. And I don't know what 2022 is going to bring, but that's actually what we're going to talk about next. Our predictions for 2022. And I'm going to start it off with kind of a general overlook of jewelry. So as a lot of people know, 2021 has been amazing for jewelry sales. And Idon Golan, the Israel-based analyst, in fact, wrote a analysis piece recently where he called it the year of jewelry. Jewelry sales are as strong as they've been in the 14 years I've been in the industry. I mean, granted, the financial downturn started right after I started, so I don't have a great run of comparison, but I've never seen jewelry sales so strong and people so positive and everyone so happy. But I don't think this level of sales, in my opinion, is sustainable for the long term. I think things are going to start to quiet down after the new year, and perhaps even in like maybe more towards the middle of 2022. I think jewelry has kind of re-entered the consumer's consciousness as something worthwhile having. And I think it's great for the industry. And I think the industry is going to continue to be strong, but I don't think this level of sales is going to be sustainable through 2022. We have this on tape. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that's just my take on it. So anyway, Brecken, do you want to start with your take on 2022? And you can talk about jewelry in general or the colored gemstone market.
I think I'll go a little into colored stones, but I would still, I think, reiterate a lot of what you were saying. I mean, I suspect that 2022 will still be a really good year for colored stones. But to your point of, you know, as things reopen, I think the category, fine jewelry overall has benefited from, you know, the people who have the money to spend weren't going on their trips. So they were putting it towards jewelry. And now I think, we'll go back to competing again for other categories. And I think that includes colored stones. But I also think, to your point, that people sort of refound their love for things. And from what I can tell, that very much included colored stones, including this really exciting idea that they were finding new stones. They had time to research. One of the guests I had in one of my summer webinars about, how the colored stone market was faring through June or July was saying the biggest luxury is time. He was like, I had calls, so many calls. And then as soon as things started reopening again, the calls got smaller. And so I think that people just had time to do research. They had time to learn about new stones, discover, what it was. And that combined with really strong pricing, they were sort of trading for other options, and they were discovering that garnets come in so many awesome colors and that kind of thing. So I think you're right. I would say that I think that probably there's going to be a little competition as the international markets reopen and people travel, but I still think that things are going to go really well. I'm personally really excited to see if Very Perry does anything for like exciting new categories of stones. I mean, I know that probably jewelry as a luxury doesn't ascribe to that as much. You're not going to spend thousands of dollars on something just because Pantone is like, this is the color. But, for once we have a color that I think speaks really well to these like exciting things like iolite or chalcedony, so I'm excited to see if that does anything. I think that, this excitement around colored stones and other categories, I'm hoping could feed into like, something that lifts the whole category again through the year. So we'll see.
So for people who don't know, Very Perry is the Pantone color of the year for 2022. And it's this kind of periwinkle blue. It's nice.
Certain sodalite as well. I feel like some sodalite is dark, but I have one rough that's like light.
Yeah, I think it seems like a kind of color that could, like a lot of stones, if you found like a very specific shade of it, could really, I mean, if you found like a really light tanzanite. I keep seeing people talking about, I'm like, oh yeah, that stone could be, sapphires. Anyway, I'm excited. We'll see.
Breck and I smell some more 5 things to know about.
Yeah, sure. Oh Lord.
Ashley, what are your predictions for 2022? And everybody really loves hearing from you because it's trends predictions.
Yes, trends predictions. I feel like this sort of maximalist era is just going to continue. So, dainty is going to continue to be out, and more bold, more layered, more expressive, more color will continue to be in, which I think is a great thing. All of these little factors kind of like wind together with, it's kind of our roaring 20s. It's overall for jewelry, I feel like 2022 will continue to ride this wave, because just right now, I feel like the country, the instability is in part because of this K-shaped recovery. So one group of Americans is getting richer, and then another majority is maybe can't afford a house, we're having, the wealth gap is just growing, which is very bad for society because it creates a more dangerous society, creates more crime, more unrest. But when it comes to selling luxury goods, it's a very good thing. So I think that 2022 will be more of this real estate bubble, these luxury goods. I mean, the watches right now are just crazy. Speaking of time being the greatest luxury, watches are just, I mean, it's really unbelievable. So much of this feels very masculine driven, I have to say. Just the energy of it, like the real estate bubble, the watches, the crypto, there's this very sort of like cowboy energy to it. When I kind of step back and look at the bigger cultural perspective. But that being said, when it comes to designer jewelry, that is overwhelmingly for and by women in today's market, and self-purchasing women are really running the show in terms of these jewelry sales. And I think that the maximalist energy and styling just continues. Multiple piercings, just more and more places to wear jewelry. And then the fun thing is when the gender lines do get blurred, with men also wearing more jewelry. So also with chains, necklaces, pearls, these fun things, which might be a little more generic, could kind of come from a lot of different people rather than maybe specific designers that are really hot. But that's even more opportunity to sell. So I see 2022 being another hot year. It is so hard in this climate to make predictions.
Yeah, no, it really is. I want to piggyback on something you said, Ashley. You mentioned the K-shaped recovery. It was really interesting. I was watching the news the other day and they had the editor-in-chief of Time magazine on, and he was kind of explaining / defending their choice of Elon Musk as the person of the year. And, it's a controversial choice for, on many levels. People have a lot of thoughts about it. And one of the things he was saying is like, yeah, he's a billionaire. He's like, we're entering another Gilded Age. I mean, there's a lot of billionaires, but you're right. At the same time, there's a lot of people that have absolutely nothing.
Yep.
So anyway, that's how he described it. We're entering another Gilded Age, and you're right. For luxury goods, that's great. For society as a whole, not so great.
The difficult part is that the averages don't tell the story, because the average doesn't exist as much anymore. It's right. Very much people on very different economic levels, in a way that just our parents didn't experience as much. And so it's very different.
Yeah, I mean, the middle class is shrinking. And I think of the way I grew up, like I was solidly middle class, but I think there are fewer and fewer kids who had the kind of experience growing up that I did right now. Anyway, Lenore, what about you? Predictions for 2022 retail?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm in the retail and financials beat, as I said before. I think when we're talking about retail, there's always this, in-store versus online debate. But I think this year has shown that they definitely both have their place and there isn't one that's overtaking the other. And I think to piggyback on something Michelle had said before, I think it definitely has been a really good year for retailers, especially for jewelry. So I think jewelers should for sure celebrate this really great year they had, but also, not to be a bummer, keep in mind that it is not always going to be this way. I think for the past 2 years almost now, discretionary dollars couldn't really go to other things. They weren't going to travel, they weren't going to dining out or any of these other things. But I think that's changing as we get better at keeping COVID in check, and people are going to want to start spending their money elsewhere. So my prediction for 2022 is that, jewelers and, retail overall, they should be prepared to face some of their old competition again, because they'll be back.
Yeah. And I think, Lenore, just to add on to that, I think the thing with travel is what we really haven't seen is the big return to big international trips, which is where people really spend the money. Like, sure, people may have gone camping or to a national park or to a little weekend trip to like a cute little town in Vermont or North Carolina or, wineries in California. People have done stuff like that. But I think you're right. Like, people haven't gone grand scale back into the big 2-week international trip. And that's really where the competition for jewelry is. And you're right. I think it's wise to operate under the assumption that the good times aren't going to last forever.
Right. Yeah.
One important thing to note, though, is which strain and variant is coming next of COVID. What will be the next travel restriction? I mean, we're just still so in that era that
that's true.
I think it's just, I wish I had the same optimism that we'll be like on all these fabulous trips.
I want to be on a fabulous trip, Ashley.
Yeah, and I don't. It just seems unrelenting in a certain sense. So 2022 might be a little early to be fully back in that kind of,
in this full travel mode. You're right, because as you said, like, who could make any predictions? People could decide, oh, I'm going to take that European vacation this summer, and then 4 months into 2022, Europe could close its borders because it has another variant.
Right. I mean, I'm not overly
Great.
optimistic that we'll all be taking these massive excursions in 2022. But I think my point just was that, jewelers should just be mindful that, like Michelle said, the good times don't always last, and there could be discretionary spending going elsewhere in the year ahead.
I guess we'll see. I think it's a great time right now to be in the travel insurance business. When you book an airline flight and there's always that box, be like, would you like to spend $21 to protect your trip? I've never done it. I've started doing it every time now.
Yeah.
Because it just seems worth it.
Oh, essential. Yes.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Brecken, Ashley, Lenore, thank you so much for all your hard work this year. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us all this afternoon. We will be back with my next question in January. So please keep an eye on our website for any upcoming topics, dates, and times. In the meantime, you can watch past episodes of our webinar series on our website and on our YouTube channel. And I just dropped that link into the chat. And thank you all for joining us today, and happy holidays to all. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.